Aloha and welcome to A Word with Ward, WWW, A Word with Ward, and today we're going to talk about education, education, and education. I'm honored to have with me Cathy Fukunga, who was the author of an excellent op-ed in the Star Advertiser. So Cathy, welcome, and to our viewers, this is going to be an exciting show because it's all about what young kids can and can't do without some parental or otherwise institutional help. It's about the preschool, and it's about what we're going to be doing, talking about your op-ed in terms of what is the impact that the early learning system is going to have on the children of the people of Hawaii. And hopefully a lot of you out there have your children either in school or preschool and know that education is the most important thing that really parents can give to their kids. Anyways, welcome, and give us a bit of your background before we start talking about all the things that you know. Give us some of the things that you've been doing in your life.
Thank you, Gene. Thanks for having me. It's a privilege to be able to speak today, to talk with you. I have been going back to school myself. I've homeschooled my children through high school. I'm returning to school. I took a research writing class last term, and my topic was early childhood education. And having done all that research, I noticed the governor was talking about early childhood education for Hawaii's children, and I had to speak out. I looked at some of the same studies that the state of Hawaii has looked at, and I came up with different conclusions than they did.
You said you preschooled two of your children for K through 12, basically?
I homeschooled my children.
So you're a teacher then?
I am, yes. I'm tutoring kids with learning disabilities right now also.
You tutor children with learning disabilities, and I understand there was something in your background. You did something in the prisons, or you were teaching in the prisons?
Oh, yes, I've also volunteered in the prison and taught some of the women there. Very eye-opening.
Okay, so you've taught kids, you've studied the pedagogy, if you will, the study of teaching, and you've written an op-ed, which, quite frankly, Cathy, really got my attention because we're in the process now in the state of Hawaii, and many of you know, to spend upwards to $30 to $40 to $50 million just to kickstart what otherwise, intuitively, no one's going to be against early education. Who doesn't want their kids to be educated? But who does not want to spend money if it's not going to be effective? And basically, some of your article was where homeschooling may not, not homeschooling, but preschool for some parents may not be working as well as it may be able to do.
That's right.
Why won't preschool work to begin the long-term changes in Hawaii that our children need? What are some of the things that you put out in that op-ed that you think are not going to be workable?
Well, what I found in my research of preschool is that oftentimes children in preschool achieve higher academic results as a result of the preschool, but by the time they're in 3rd or 4th grade, those results fade out. So much so that that term fade out is well documented in literature. If you Google it, you can find a lot of information on fade out. And
so they become from smart to being not so smart? I mean, is that?
Well, they learn stuff in preschool. They learn things in preschool, and they're benefited by the preschool, but it doesn't stick. Edward Ziegler, who is the father of the Head Start program, has said that family and life experience have a far greater impact on children than schooling does. And that's eye-opening, coming from someone who was a founder of the Head Start program.
And I think probably every study that I've ever seen since doing my research at the University of Hawaii, I did my dissertation on ethnic enterprise in America, and basically looked at how high-achieving families produced kids, men, women, who went into business and became really big job creators.
Yes.
A lot of it was the child-rearing habits, and then I looked at child-rearing habits as its correlation to school achievement. And parental involvement became the biggest variable, whether it was money or teachers or community. That was the biggest variable.
Yes.
Does that seem to have come out in your studies? Where
Absolutely. Absolutely.
the positive results that come out from that. What are some of the elements that have worked in the in getting disadvantaged or other schools in the preschool context?
In looking at some of the programs that worked, they did research studies back in the 60s and 70s, and actually that's what Hawaii's program is based on, studies done in the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Some of what worked in those programs were a couple of elements. They worked with disadvantaged children. Disadvantaged children will benefit from preschool, and there's an opportunity cost there. The stimulation they get in the preschool is actually better than what they get at home. They found that children from a less disadvantaged background are actually harmed because they would do better at home than they would in the school.
Mm-hmm. You know, you're ringing a bell when you say the program for disadvantaged children, because I forget where it was in the war on poverty that President Johnson started out with the Head Start program.
Right, in the 60s.
Which I understand was reviewed within the last few months and had spent $80 billion.
It's astounding.
And the conclusion, and this was not disputed, the conclusion was it didn't work.
Yes.
$80 billion, so it doesn't work. And Cathy, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to have you in today before we spend or go down the line in Hawaii with $50, $60 million, which could go even double, triple that when it gets full on.
Right.
Some of the pitfalls that we should learn, and some of the things that you mentioned in your article, like stimulating environment. What's that all about? What's a stimulating environment? If people are watching us and they can see, is their home environment a stimulating environment or not? Or is a preschool one good or bad?
Well, you know, is it a stimulating environment? Many parents, I'll say many parents, when they bring home a new child, they will talk to their baby, they play with it, they read to it, they interact with it. Even before the child is verbal, they'll, you know, as the baby makes noise, you respond and you teach the pattern of conversation. That is stimulation. Mm-hmm. And not all parents know to do that. Sometimes when families have to work a lot, they don't have the time to spend with their children, or dysfunctional families.
Who may be busy trying to take care of themselves.
May not even be able to take care of themselves.
The parenting skills to take care of children.
Right. And there was some interesting research I ran across in the process of my studies about stimulation. There are some behavioral experts, Pascoe and Earp, who did a study that showed that a mother's perception of how supported she is impacts her ability to stimulate her child. So the more the mom feels supported, the more stimulation she can give to her child. Okay? So if mom is feeling like, I'm all alone in this and nobody's helping me, her child is not getting what it needs. And something else about stimulation that I found, children's brains are very malleable. When they're young, they're figuring out who they are in the world. Am I important? Are other people safe?
Is that only young people? I thought it was old people. There's a lot of people still figuring that one out.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I think I'm still working on some of that. But it's one of the jobs that a child has, is figuring out, how do I fit in the world? And if they get that stimulation from mom, if their needs are met, if they are taken care of, they figure out that the world is good, I'm okay, I'm important. And if they end up being put in front of a TV to watch TV all day, or if they hear arguing in their family, home is a scary place. Maybe I'm not important because my needs aren't being met. And they have a different picture of who they are in the world.
And that directly impacts their ability to learn.
It shapes their life choices. And you know, Jean, when I worked in the prison, I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I worked in the prison, I met women who were raised in families where maybe they didn't get that stimulation they needed, and it shaped their life choices, and they ended up in prison.
So the impact of early childhood learning, early childhood socialization, as in the department that I graduated from in the university, all behavior is learned. And if the behavior that's learned that you are without value, you are without any support from anybody, you're not going to transfer that into your kid, and your kid is not going to then be able to take advantage of this. Even though you said that government would have a role in this preschool early learning, but it's going to fade away as the preschool becomes regular school, which then, what did you say, it fades away at what point?
Third or fourth grade.
Third or fourth grade.
The benefits are lost. They can't tell the difference between children who went to preschool and children who did not.
Now that's a conundrum. So in other words, so government has a role, but the role to be effective has got to get closer to that environment where the stimulation is, i.e. the parents. Now, are there ways to intervene and help the parents so that if you can't get the kid with a sustainable growth pattern, is there an intervention? And this is really talking about the size of government and maybe without limits. Can government intervene to help parents to teach their kids to be better parents so the kids will learn and they'll have a chance to get an education? Because right now, if you don't have an education, in the old days you could be in a well-built manufacturing town and get a job just by having the bulk of your body to carry things or do things. You don't have to think. You didn't have to have an education. Today's workforce is going to require people with some education, ability to speak, ability to do computers, ability to have smartphones and do things that are otherwise not like the old day. So if we're denying a educational opportunity, what is it that the government can do with the parents? What does the data say about intervention at the parental level?
Okay. You asked me a moment ago about what were the elements that made preschool work. And I said they worked with disadvantaged children. It worked when there's adequate stimulation for the child. And a third really important factor is parental involvement. And that's what I think you're getting at right now.
That's the big one in my reading of the data.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I ran across another research study in my looking at this topic. There was a program done by a social worker. Her name was Catherine Dunlap. It was fascinating. She set up a preschool program in a low-income housing project. And her purpose was really not to have a preschool program. Her purpose was to empower the parents. And so one of the requirements to have the children in the preschool program is that one of the caregivers, it was probably the mom, or maybe an auntie, had to participate. And I'm not just talking about working with the children in the classroom. They worked to plan what they did in the preschool. They worked to, they had some of the parents be voting members of the board. I'm drawing a blank right now.
Well, they were actively engaged in the process.
Yeah, they helped set policy.
Oh, that's what legislators are supposed to be able to do.
I'm sorry?
Help set policy. That's
in the preschool.
That's what we're here in the state capitol.
Not in the state, in the preschool.
But they were actively engaged at those levels.
Yes, they were. And then they identified, they used the plan, do, review concept. They would plan what they were going to do, they would implement their plans, and then they would review it and talk about, well, what worked about what we did, what didn't work, and what can we do better? And they also looked at what skills am I needing that would help me do this better. And the staff at the preschool then brought in mentors who would teach them the skills they needed. And the mentors were also women who had escaped poverty, professional women. Oh, Jean, there was a wonderful story about one of the mentors meeting with the women and sitting in a room with them, and you know, there were pictures on the wall and saying, oh, I see a picture of Harriet Tubman and Harriet Beecher Stowe and Martin Luther King, and these are leaders of the community. And I look around this table at the moms here, and I see Javon and Tanisha, and And I see the future leaders of our community right here. And what that did for the women, it was amazing. So
did they measure then their children's performance as students?
you know, they
or was
didn't
it
measure the children's. They didn't measure the children's performance, but what they did measure is the women's performance.
Okay, as the prime mover of then the children's performance.
Right.
Did they do in the Head Start program when they basically said it was a failure? Did they have all the metrics for the children as they went through various stages of elementary school on? I've not read other than the macro results of the study where they said basically the $80 billion that they've spent was with good intentions, as I'm sure that the early learning that we're embarking on in the state of Hawaii has good intentions. But can government actually get into the family around the kitchen table and actually nurture parents to be able to nurture their kids? Or is the dysfunction, as we know with many, because of drugs, because of mental difficulties, challenges? That is a difficult nut to crack. And my own view is, if it's not helping those who can't help themselves, we shouldn't be putting the money into helping the middle class even get more advanced than they already are,
Right.
which in many people said in the reviews of Sesame Street and other Head Start programs, it was not the deprived or the disadvantaged kids that were watching Sesame Street. It was the middle class kids, and they were getting even more advanced when learning the ABCs and seeing Kermit the Frog and all the other things than the kids who actually should be getting the advantage.
Right.
And my fear is if we don't tap into those who somehow the parents can get involved with and the stimulating environment can be created, I'm just wondering if this is not just going to make politicians feel good, which I know in your article you said that supporting pre-Ks is politically, not research-based. It's politically based.
Yes.
Politicians want to say they support education for children, but their rhetoric extrapolates results from successful programs, hoping Hawaii will have the same results without the same family investment.
Right.
So you don't really like politicians. I shouldn't have said that. But it's really, well, who out there, whether they're elected or unelected, who's going to be against early learning?
Right. There's a lot of whiz-bang in setting up a universal preschool. But you know what? If it doesn't work, we're throwing away our money. You asked a number of different things. I'm thinking I have several paths to go down. Let me take this one. You asked about the programs, and there were 3 large-scale research studies done. They were done back in the 60s and 70s with preschool. And they are the studies that I've seen Hawaii basing their research on. A popular one is the Perry Preschool Project. They produce great results, these studies. But they were research studies, and they were small. And there's something very different between a small research study and what we're trying to do right now. And I'll tell you something. They were done 40 or 50 years ago. In those 40 or 50 years, since those studies were done, they have not been able to reproduce those results anywhere.
And one of the tests of scientific validity is that it's replicable.
Right.
That people can do it and they can get the
Right.
same results, given the same stimulus, the response, etc.
Yes.
What is that saying then about the state of the art of early childhood learning if they can't replicate what was done in the 60s? Is it suspect then that this stuff is effective? Or you said it's effective but it fades away. Effective but fades away.
Well, you know, Jean, what I would propose is that we set up something similar to this study that I mentioned where they empowered parents.
Okay, let's say you're Governor Abercrombie. You're going to set up the program.
Yeah.
How would you design it? What would you do?
Okay.
Cathy Fukunga, designed by you. What should early school learning look like?
Thank you for that temporary power. I like that.
It's all yours.
What I would do is I'd set up a pilot program. I would allow parents to be in it if they were willing to commit their time to it. By commit their time, I'd model it after this program by Catherine Dunlap that I mentioned. They would be involved in planning and in getting trained in what they didn't know. They would invest, I call it sweat equity. They would invest themselves in the program. As a result of this research study the women were changed. When the women were changed, they felt more supported. They were able to stimulate their children more. And not only the child in preschool, but the siblings along the line. So it multiplied the benefits.
Has there ever been a measurement of how effective mothering or effective is called parental involvement? Is it quantitative or is it qualitative? How much time you spend with your kids, or is it the kind of quality time that you spend with the kids? Or is it both of them?
I'm sure there's been research on it. I haven't really looked into it personally. I think quality makes a huge difference, kind of what I'm saying
Because
there.
you said the first prerequisite was the willingness of the parents to
Yes.
become engaged. How do you
Yes.
measure the willingness of the parents to?
Well, do they do it? The willingness of a parent to be involved in the preschool program
Right.
is that they come, they attend,
show up.
they participate. And if they don't, then I'm sorry, you haven't earned the privilege of having your children in
Okay,
this
back
program.
to you being governor.
Yes.
What if they say, look, I got 2 jobs.
Yes.
I've
Yes.
got a bus to take, which I have to
Right.
wait an hour for, and by the time I get back, you want me to sit here and be nice
Right.
with a preschool group of people who, other than my own child, I have no idea who they are or what they're doing.
Right. And you know,
What
in
do
the
you do
state
with
of
those?
Hawaii, with the taxes we have and the income we have, it's hard to support a family and have that time to spend with your children. It's hard. And you know, the governor is proposing a huge amount of money for an across-the-board preschool program. I suggest we take some of that money. Perhaps we need to subsidize some of those parents for a short term while they learn to meet their children's needs.
You should pilot it. How big would the pilot be? What does the pilot look like? There's big pilots and there's small pilots. Because I think the
Gosh.
governor said that he's piloting this, but I think it's
Oh.
a pretty big pilot.
Okay,
as it
I'm
goes.
thinking a smaller pilot than what
Okay,
he's thinking. I'm
what
pretty
does your
sure.
pilot look like?
I haven't really thought about that.
Well, I would think that a number of schools with differing socioeconomic neighborhoods would be a
would-
good way of sampling.
I would probably target low income. I would
That-
target low income areas. Kathleen Dunlap did this in a low income housing project. I'd start there. The children who are with Head Start right now, I think that's an income-based
You know,
program.
in the Finance Committee today, we just heard a bill that was about foster children.
Yeah.
And the foster children,
Yes.
when they're 18, are basically asked to leave and they're thrown out on the street. And
Yes.
the graduation rate of university bachelor's degree was 3% for foster children. The normal population is about 18%. So that nurturing environment
Yes.
clearly made a difference in terms of who could graduate, who couldn't graduate. And it's in those neighborhoods or those kinds of individuals that these kinds of programs can
Yes.
intervene and make a difference and get them at to the college level, and not necessarily having the 4-year, or if they want a 2-year degree, but to where they have a running chance at a job in the modern economy.
Yes. So you're making me think, I am thinking of another facet. You asked what children are we talking about? I said disadvantaged children. Let me address that.
Okay.
Those children you just mentioned, the foster children, what they miss is the bonding, the attachment bonding with their parents because they're pulled out of their home for whatever reason. Those children certainly are in need. They are disadvantaged. Some other children might be low-income families, not necessarily. Some low-income families are great parents. But maybe families where English is not their native language.
That could be a target.
Those
And I'm
children are
thinking that
yeah.
I guess the soft underbelly of poverty is actually 71% of those families in the poverty or below the poverty line are single parents, primarily single mothers.
Yes.
And I would think they would benefit immensely from a program like
There
this.
you go.
And,
That's another
and I
target
know we're
group.
thinking as we're producing our show here,
Yes.
but it may be where that could be one of the target pilot program
Thank you.
groups
Yes.
to see now, because if that works and that intervenes, and then it has to be longitudinal in the sense that we got to get beyond this 3 years afterwards and it fades out. Because if it fades out, you want to have something either that follows through with it, or in effect it becomes it's like you've got to have lines that then recharge it down and then keep the thing Otherwise, your investment that you've got in the beginning is lost.
Right.
So it's a difficult proposition.
Well, you know, Edward Ziegler, who I mentioned, the father of Head Start, had a lot to say about preschools. And one of the things he said, maybe I've mentioned it, is that one of the contributors to academic success is a good home environment and good schools. The reason fade out happens is largely because of a poor home environment, and the children who've gone to preschool have gone to poor schools that don't support their gains, and their gains are not supported at home.
You're almost bumping up against the breakdown of the family in the nation, where I think in the 80s, at least 80% were married, and now it's 50% are married, and a lot of kids are growing up not knowing which parent was of one side or the other. And there's a lot of confusion, particularly when it comes to poverty on top of all of these other dysfunctional families. Cathy, we've almost run out of time. Tell me when you're going to write your next article or your next letter to the governor proposing this pilot program that you've designed here.
I'm researching a different topic this term. However, I am curious about what our legislature is doing on this right now. I'm thinking...
We're talking about the money primarily, if I may interrupt you. And we're talking about the money that it would take, but there's not too many people who know the nuance of the data, of what works and what doesn't work.
Right.
And quite frankly, following the show, I'm going to be looking at what the Head Start program taught us or didn't teach us about what we should be avoiding. Because if it doesn't work, $30, $40, and $50 million from the people of Hawaii at this particular economy is not going to be well spent, and as it really helps those disadvantaged kids. Do you have any closing comments?
I do. In the program I mentioned with Kathleen Dunlap, empowering the parents, if the parents are able to support their children more, the parents grow up knowing they are the children grow up knowing they're valuable, they'll be able to hold on to their academic gains. They will be, the parents will be able to influence not only their own children. These women went out and they became significant leaders in their community. So if we train the parents as well as the children, not only are we helping the children and their siblings, but we're training the parents, and we're changing the community by changing those parents who felt powerless, but we're empowering them. So I think this is the way to go. It will break the cycle of poverty. It will break the cycle of poverty.
There you've heard it, a productive way to break the cycle of poverty, of which in America we need to pay a lot of attention to. It's been an honor, Cathy, to speak with you, and thank you, Star Advertiser, for putting her op-ed in the newspaper. I look forward to future discussions on this subject. But the people of Hawaii, thank you for viewing A Word with Ward, a word about education and its importance for our community. Until the next time, aloha.
Thank you, Gene.